This tutorial will look at internal verification, what it is, and how it is carried out. The role of the internal verifier is varied. It includes carrying out sampling at all stages of the delivery: pre, i.e. before delivery; interim, i.e. during delivery; and summative, which is also known as final verification. Evaluating the results of that sampling and taking any action necessary, so reporting on the findings, organising training as necessary, identifying and disseminating improvements. Managing information is really important. This includes securely storing records, complying with data protection and confidentiality, and monitoring the assessor compliance with same. You also need to be supporting assessors. You need to assess risk and be able to manage it. You need to comply with external verification or audit requirements. And finally, you need to carry out formal reviews of the internal assessment and verification processes to ensure that they reflect current needs and practice. Quality assurance has an emphasis on risk. As an internal verifier, you need to consider risk. For example, is there a new assessor or changes to a unit, etc.? You need to then create a sampling strategy or plan that meets those risks identified. For example, 100% sampling of new assessors, dual assessment as a training support, and so on. For SVQs, you should use the CAMERA acronym explained on the next slide. Let's look at CAMERA in more detail. C equals candidates. You should try to internally verify across all cohorts, whether that's part-time, full-time, different gender, or with particular requirements. A equals assessors. Take into consideration their experience and qualifications, their workload, look at their CPD, aim to cover all assessors' work over time. M equals methods of assessment. Examine the methods used, observation, questioning, products, and so on. Try to cover all methods over time. E equals evidence and elements. Is the evidence valid and authentic? Is it current and sufficient? For elements, are there any problem areas and special requirements? You should ensure you sample all elements or units of a qualification over time. R equals records and revisions. This means looking at assessor reports, assessment practices, portfolios and files, and making sure that any revisions to units have been correctly implemented at the right time. Finally, A equals assessment locations, covering all assessment locations over time. When carrying out internal verification, you need to consider the size of your sample. How much will you look at? You need to consider the stages of verification. You should aim to carry out pre, interim, and summative verification. You need to ensure you monitor the assessor's work at key stages of the assessment cycle. You observe, give feedback, inspect records, and ensure practice is compliant. So what else dictates your approach to sampling? Besides the risks already discussed, you also need to consider the assessment strategy and evidence guidance for the competencies you are internally verifying. You also need to know and follow your organisation's requirements and processes for both internal procedures and external auditing requirements, such as the awarding body, ISO, or British standards. Internal verification should take account of the assessment cycle, and therefore sampling should be carried out at every stage. This means that quality assurance requires that you check documentation, processes, and standards are up to date and current before delivery. This is normally carried out annually or as standards are revised. You need to also check that induction of candidates covers all requirements, that is pre-delivery, and that it has been effectively conducted during and post-delivery. This is done through inspecting paperwork and discussing their induction with the candidates. The internal verifier needs to ensure that feedback from any external audits is disseminated and, where necessary, that actions are implemented. This is carried out pre, during and post-delivery. They need to ensure that framework requirements are accurately met by assessors. This can be identified from the sampling plans and during interim verification. Internal verification should be carried out during delivery. This is known as interim verification and is a good way of identifying issues that can be resolved whilst a candidate is still live with the organisation. And you should be identifying good practice that can be shared with other assessors and verifiers. It also enables effective tracking of candidate and assessor progress and contact and ensures the assessment requirements are being met. At the end of the assessment process, we carry out final or post verification. This is the final check to ensure that all requirements have been met and that all evidence has been correctly assessed. This then enables certification to be arranged. If interim verification is carried out effectively, it prevents end loading of this final confirmation of achievement, improves efficiency, and speeds up the achievement and certification process. Just as in assessing, you should take a holistic approach when you're internally verifying. Look at the whole portfolio. Target specific assessment evidence such as an observation. Look at the items covered in that observation and ask yourself some questions. Has the assessor correctly signposted that evidence to the correct standard or criteria? Is the observation backed up by other evidence, for example, product, witness testimony? Is the observation of sufficient depth to give a good insight into the candidate's competence? And is it detailed enough, and has it been cross-referenced across units as appropriate? Finally, do you agree with the assessor's decision? There are some important things to be aware of. Firstly, you are not reassessing. You are simply checking that the assessor has made the correct decisions at the correct points and mapped them against the standards as required. You should identify and clarify issues promptly. You should sample using the camera approach. You should share your findings, both positive and negative, especially at standardization meetings. You should look for developmental opportunities for your assessors and for yourself.